10. Tijuana to San Diego. US authorities discovered a massive drug smuggling tunnel in spring of 2022. The secret passage was about 6 football fields long, leading from a warehouse in Mexico to an industrial area on US soil. The secret underground passage, like something straight out of a movie, went from Tijuana to San Diego. It even featured a rail system, ventilation, electricity, and strong reinforced walls. It was made meticulously and to last. According to local authorities near San Diego's Otay Mesa border crossing, over a dozen similar tunnels have been found over the last 20 years. All of them are sophisticated, each one set up by clever smugglers to make millions in cash. When the US authorities busted this tunnel, they found almost 2,000 pounds of cocaine, over 150 pounds of meth, and a small amount of heroin. However, they don't know how long the tunnel has been in operation or how much contraband has gotten through since it was built. They arrested 6 people on charges of conspiring to distribute cocaine, each one a resident of Southern California. One thing that's really interesting is that the type of drugs seized at the tunnel has changed significantly over the past few years. Prior to 2019, when California legalized pot, there were massive amounts of marijuana coming under the border. Now it's mostly hard stuff like cocaine and fentanyl. Tunnels are also a lot more useful to smugglers than trying to get things across the border the usual way. Smugglers are able to move non-stop in and out of the tunnel, smuggling 24 hours a day. The tunnel ended at a nondescript warehouse on the side of a busy street, a warehouse that looked like any old warehouse in any city's industrial district. 9. Rick Lutjes. Rick Lutjes was one of the most successful cocaine smugglers of the early 1980s. He brought an estimated 10 tons of pure cocaine into the country between 1980 and 1984. That much cocaine was worth roughly $20 billion. Rick didn't get all that money, but he did clean up with millions in cash. The 1980s was what some people look back on as the death of old America. That was when cocaine started flowing into the country from Colombia, when crack cocaine hit the streets, and when the war on drugs truly started. Colombian drug cartels hired American aircraft pilots to fly from Colombia to Florida with their cargo full of illegal substances. Rick was particularly successful because he didn't seem like a drug smuggler. He was a businessman who lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He seemed like a perfectly ordinary guy, except he was bringing more Colombian powder into the country than just about anyone else at the time. While other smugglers were getting caught, Rick remained under the radar. He convinced the drug cartel to stop flying the product into Florida because it was constantly monitored by authorities, and to instead fly it into Scranton. This proved to be highly lucrative. It was such good business that Rick hired other pilots to help him do runs. He was bringing pounds and pounds of blow into the country. But it all went south in 1984 when one of his pilots crashed into a car and killed somebody. Cops found 500 pounds of cocaine and Rick did 8.5 years in prison. 8. The Animal Smuggler. From early 2016 and February of 2022, a man in California was smuggling wild creatures into the United States of America. Most of the creatures he smuggled were reptiles. He got away with it for nearly 6 years, and that was no easy feat. The California man smuggled over 1,700 wild animals the old-fashioned way, by hiding them in his clothes. He brought them from Mexico to the US, stashed in his pants or in his jacket, and over the 6 years he was active made roughly $739,000. His name is Jose Manuel Perez, 30 years old. He recently pleaded guilty to 2 counts of smuggling goods and 1 count of wildlife trafficking. He admitted to smuggling Mexican beaded lizards, Mexican box turtles, baby crocodiles, and other strange species from as far away as Hong Kong. The animals would usually be picked up from the airport in Ciudad Juarez, then driven to El Paso, but it wasn't always Jose doing the smuggling. He had accomplices whom he paid a small fee to move the animals for him. He then sold the animals to customers across the country by shipping them in the mail. Jose was arrested in February of 2022 while trying to enter the US with 60 reptiles on his body. They were hidden in bags and stuffed randomly in his clothes, in his jacket, tucked under his thighs, and right in his pants pocket. 7. Drugs and fruit. In September of 2019, customs officials in Rotterdam discovered drugs and fruit. The custom officials were inspecting a shipment of bananas at the Rotterdam port in the Netherlands, sent from Latin America. The bananas were infused with 3,300 pounds of cocaine, and it wasn't even the first time such an elaborate scheme was busted. Smugglers have taken to hiding their product in fruits and vegetables, and even candy. Since the port of Rotterdam is the largest port in Europe, the gateway to the entire European drug market, this is where most of the shipments wind up. In April 2019, customs officials found 2,500 pounds of cocaine concealed in a cargo of bananas from Costa Rica. According to a police expert who spoke with Dutch newspaper Algemeen Dagblad, the authorities used to be surprised when they found shipments of only a few hundred pounds of cocaine. But these days, shipments come in with over 10,000 pounds of drugs. 60% of all cocaine in Europe comes straight from the Rotterdam port, and a lot of it smuggled inside banana shipments. The reason is a little surprising. The thing about bananas is that they spoil quickly. For this reason, customs is not allowed to hold shipments of bananas for very long. An entire shipping container full of bananas is also cheap, at only around $17,000. Bananas are inexpensive. Most shipments will never even be touched by customs officials, and it's one of the convenient ways smugglers have learned to move product. 6. ATF cigarette smuggling. The ATF, or Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, is in charge of preventing cigarette smuggling. Even though you can buy cigarettes at just about any store in America, they're still smuggled from state to state. Smugglers make a profit by purchasing cigarettes in a state with lower taxes and then selling them in a state with higher taxes. If they sell enough, they can keep the difference. Smugglers can also take huge quantities of cigarettes from Native American reservations where there's no tax at all, and then distribute them on the black market for an even bigger payday. The issue with the ATF and their investigation into illegal cigarette smuggling is that there isn't a massive market for it. It's not like some other illicit smuggling rings. And so there are accusations that the ATF created their own cigarette smuggling network to employ smugglers underneath them. They then use these hired smugglers to reel in buyers, who the ATF then arrest, keeping their money. In 2013, a report from the Inspector General claimed that the ATF had a serious lack of oversight in their smuggling program. Informants brought in by the ATF were raking in profits in the millions. The report went on to say ATF agents misused at least $162 million and themselves smuggled over $420 million worth of the little cancer sticks. All of this just so they could make arrests, further their careers, and keep the war on illegal cigarettes running. 5. Frank Lucas. Frank Lucas was a notorious drug kingpin who helped flood Harlem and Newark with potent heroin in the 1960s and 1970s. His product destroyed lives, but it also propelled Frank out of poverty and into the big leagues. He formed an enterprise that would make him filthy rich. Frank allegedly ordered and committed murders, but he also went the extra mile to smuggle heroin out of Vietnam and into the United States of America. Frank went about this in the smartest way. He bribed the right people in Vietnam to allow shipments of heroin out of the country. He had a team of soldiers who smuggled heroin into America using the bodies of dead servicemen. He had his own carpenter in Vietnam who built coffins with false bottoms to conceal the illegal drugs. Frank wound up making roughly $1 million a day at the peak of his drug empire and had an estimated $52 million stashed for a rainy day. But all that came to an abrupt end in 1974 when he was arrested at his home in New Jersey, convicted on federal drug charges and sentenced to 70 years in prison. Amazingly, one of the biggest and most violent gangsters in American history only served 7 years. He flipped and sold out everyone he could, getting a reduced sentence. Frank died a free man on May 30th, 2019. 4. Colombian espresso. Smugglers got a brilliant idea in 2020. They decided to send cocaine to Italy hidden inside coffee beans. Everyone knows Italy is famous for their coffee, their powerful espressos and beautiful street cafes. It made sense then for the smugglers to hide their product in one of the country's favorite goods. Police at the Milan airport intercepted a package containing 500 coffee beans filled with cocaine. It wasn't the biggest bust in Italian history, only about 150 grams. Still, it must have taken a significant amount of work. Each coffee bean had been carefully prepared. They were sliced, hollowed, and then packaged with drugs and sealed. As if to mock the Italian police, the shipment of coffee beans was addressed to Santino D'Antonio, the mob boss in the movie John Wick 2. In reality, it was a 50-year-old man at a tobacco shop in Florence who picked up the package, only to be immediately arrested by the cops. 3. Egyptian relics. A man from Brooklyn was arrested for trying to be Indiana Jones. He was not the most intelligent smuggler in the world, but he was certainly ambitious. He showed up at the JFK airport with dirty suitcases that were literally dirty, as in covered in dirt. Inside the suitcases, authorities found relics from ancient Egypt. According to the US federal prosecutors, many of the artifacts are over 4,000 years old. This has been a problem ever since the Arab Spring in 2010. During the Egyptian uprising, the Cairo Museum was broken into and raided. Famous archaeological sites were looted, and the country was robbed of many of their most precious items. Since 2015, the Egyptian government has been trying to track those artifacts down. Many of them have already leaked around the world and been purchased by private collectors. Our Brooklyn smuggler is Ashraf Omar Eldarir. He had 3 suitcases filled with around 590 antiques. The antiques were covered in foam and protected with bubble wrap, but the suitcases were in rough shape. When the US Customs and Border Protection agents opened them, sand and dirt spilled out. It was like he clawed the artifacts out of a sandy tomb and stuffed them straight into his bags. His luggage even stank like wet earth, making agents suspicious. As for the artifacts themselves, they varied. Gold amulets, funerary pyramids from Egyptian royalty, and stone monuments covered in hieroglyphics from the Roman period. 2. X-ray proof. A group of enthusiastic smugglers recently got busted delivering illegal contraband to Canada. Police caught the international smuggling ring even though they'd gone through some extreme measures to not get caught. The smuggling ring was using commercial trucks outfitted with secret compartments to take cocaine and methamphetamine from Mexico through the US and into Canada. The Toronto Police Service tracked the organization for 6 months, then arrested the crooks with over $50 million worth of drugs. Toronto Police Chief James Raymer called the amount of street drugs seized staggering. But here's the really clever part. The traffickers evaded detection at the borders they crossed with hydraulic hidden compartments. These traps were only able to be opened using a special hydraulic contraption. Each compartment could hold about 220 pounds of product. They were also outfitted with X-ray tampering material. The trucks were so sophisticated that not even X-rays could penetrate the secret compartments to locate the drugs. If it hadn't been for the hard detective work of the police, these trucks would still be on the road. 1. Face masks and cocaine. In 2020, drug smugglers tried to use the pandemic to their advantage. Peruvian police seized a shipment of cocaine on its way to Hong Kong that was hidden inside a batch of surgical masks. The very masks people were supposed to be using to protect them from getting sick were crammed full of drugs. It wasn't too large of a shipment, just one big box sent through the regular post, but it contained over 2 pounds of drugs and was properly packaged in boxes of Peruvian-made face masks. Cops said it was a great example of how criminals catch on very quickly to global conditions, then try using them to their advantage. They thought they were being smart and that the authorities would never dare check a shipment of masks for COVID-19. Peru is the second largest producer of illegal cocaine in the world. This is according to the US Drug Enforcement Administration. They frequently send drugs to Hong Kong, with a shipment of 2 tons seized back in 2018. Would you rather be busted as a smuggler bringing contraband into Canada or the US? Let us know what would be worse in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe and come back soon for more shocking videos from the channel.